"Dad, you should probably stay home and take care of the house." My daughter said that while planning a luxury trip to Hawaii. Not because I was sick, not because I couldn't afford it, but because, according to her, 62 was apparently too old to fly with the family. She thought she was leaving me behind to water the plants and collect the mail. What she didn't know was that those 2 weeks would cost her the house she grew up in. And by the time she realized what I'd done, she had already called me 43 times. If you've ever been treated like you were invisible, underestimated, or quietly pushed aside by the people you love, hit that like button, subscribe, and get ready for one of the most satisfying family revenge stories you'll hear today. 3 years after my wife Evelyn died, I had become the kind of man people worried about. Not openly. Quietly, the kind of concern that sounds like, "Are you eating okay? And do you need help with anything?" I lived alone in the same Las Vegas house we had shared for 26 years. Every room still carried her fingerprints. Her cardigan hung by the back door. Her gardening gloves were still in the garage drawer. I watered the desert roses she planted, even though I'd never been good with plants. Some mornings I caught myself talking to them. I would have denied it if anyone asked. My daughter Emily called every Sunday at exactly 6:30 p.m. "How are you sleeping, Dad?" "Fine. Eating enough?" "Yep." "Then weather." Granddaughter updates. Minor repairs around the house. 15 minutes. Click. My son Daniel was different. He showed up unannounced with takeout and real questions. One night he leaned across the kitchen table and asked, "Are you actually happy, Dad?" I stared at the steam rising from my coffee. I couldn't answer, because the truth was, I wasn't living. I was maintaining. Emily, meanwhile, had quietly moved me into a different category. Not father. Responsibility, it happened so gradually I almost didn't notice. Until my neighbor Margaret did. She was 71, retired school teacher, and incapable of lying to spare feelings. "She looks through you," Margaret said one blistering afternoon as we sat on my porch with iced tea. "She's busy," I replied. Margaret snorted. "You're not old, Michael. You run every morning. You fixed my fence without being asked. Old men don't do that." Then she looked me dead in the eye. "You've started believing what your daughter thinks you are." That sentence stayed with me. And 6 weeks later, at Emily's dining room table, she proved Margaret right. Because that was the night my daughter told me I was too old for Hawaii, and I decided to stop acting like she was right. The Hawaii trip started as a casual conversation. At least, that's how Emily presented it. One Sunday evening, while we were finishing dinner at her house, she excitedly pulled out her tablet and began showing everyone pictures of white sand beaches, crystal clear water, and a luxury resort on Maui's western coast. Richard leaned back with a satisfied smile. Sophie practically bounced in her chair. Daniel looked over at me. "You should come with us, Dad." Emily paused for the briefest moment. Not long enough for anyone else to notice. Long enough for me. She smiled politely. "We'll see. Just 2 harmless words." But they carried the weight of a locked door. Weeks passed. Every phone call included another update. The hotel upgraded our suite. We booked a snorkeling excursion. Sophie's so excited about the luau. We found the perfect sunset cruise. Every detail, every plan, every reservation, everything, except an invitation. I kept waiting. Maybe she wanted to surprise me. Maybe she was still figuring out room arrangements. Maybe I was overthinking it. That's the dangerous thing about love. It convinces you to explain away the moments that hurt. Daniel finally stopped by one evening carrying 2 bags of tacos. He set them on my kitchen counter and sighed. "You've noticed, haven't you?" I didn't answer. "You haven't been invited." I forced a smile. Maybe they forgot. He looked almost offended. "Dad, nobody forgets something like that." He rubbed the back of his neck. I brought it up. "What did Emily say?" Daniel hesitated. That tiny pause told me everything. "She said she'd think about it." I nodded slowly. "I see." He looked miserable. I argued. "I know you did. I told her you're healthier than half the people I work with." I laughed quietly. "I appreciate that." But she wouldn't budge. Neither of us spoke after that. The silence filled the kitchen louder than words ever could. The following Saturday, Emily invited everyone over for dinner. Pot roast. Fresh bread. Homemade pie. The kind of family meal that looked perfect from the outside. Everyone smiled. Everyone laughed. Nobody talked about anything important. I watched Emily moving around the kitchen. Organized. Efficient. Always planning. Always managing. She wasn't cruel. That almost made it worse. Cruel people know they're hurting you. People who think they're helping rarely notice the damage they leave behind. Dinner ended. Plates disappeared. Sophie wandered upstairs with her phone. Richard turned on the television. Daniel glanced toward me. He knew. I'd been waiting almost 8 months. I wasn't leaving without asking. I cleared my throat. I've been checking flights. Everyone froze. I found a non-stop from Las Vegas to Maui. Emily slowly placed her water glass onto the table. The tiny sound echoed through the room. I figured I'd book the same resort if there's still availability. Silence. 3 seconds. Long enough to understand everything. Emily folded her hands together. Dad. Her voice was soft. Careful. Practiced. I don't think that's a good idea. I smiled politely. Why not? She looked toward Richard. He suddenly became fascinated with the tablecloth. It's a long flight, she said. The weather's hot. There's a lot of walking. I don't want you exhausting yourself. I blinked. Exhausting myself? She nodded. And honestly, she took a slow breath. We were hoping this trip would just be for the immediate family. I stared at her. I am your immediate family. You know what I mean. No, I don't. She swallowed. We thought, she chose her words carefully, you'd be more comfortable staying home. Then came the sentence that changed everything. You can take care of the house while we're gone. She smiled sadly. Someone should be there to collect the mail, water the garden, make sure nothing happens. In that instant, something inside me cracked. Not loudly. Quietly, like old glass under pressure. She wasn't treating me like a father anymore. She was treating me like a house sitter, a caretaker, a retired old man whose biggest purpose was making sure the sprinklers still worked. I felt my chest tighten. Heat rushed into my face. My fingers curled beneath the table where no one could see them. Every memory of Evelyn flashed through my mind. The vacations we'd dreamed about, the passport we'd renewed together, the promises we'd made. Gone. Replaced by one sentence. You're too old. I looked into Emily's eyes. She expected disappointment. Maybe tears. Maybe an argument. Instead, I smiled. I understand. She looked relieved. She thought she'd won. She had no idea that the quietest man at the table had just made the biggest decision of his life. I drove home in complete silence. Not because I had nothing to say. Because I was afraid of what might come out if I opened my mouth. The streets of Las Vegas blurred beneath the glow of the streetlights as my hands rested lightly on the steering wheel. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It was steady. Dangerously steady. People think heartbreak arrives with tears. Sometimes it arrives with perfect calm. When I pulled into my driveway, I didn't get out immediately. The engine ticked softly as it cooled. I stared at the house Evelyn and I had built together. 3 bedrooms. A neatly trimmed lawn. The desert roses blooming near the porch. The porch light still glowing, just as it had every night for nearly 4 decades. It wasn't just a house. It was our history. Every birthday, every Christmas, every argument that ended with laughter, every dream we'd whispered after midnight. And according to my daughter, its highest purpose now was keeping me busy while everyone else lived. I laughed. A short, bitter laugh. So that's who I've become. The house sitter. The old man. The backup plan. I closed my eyes. Then I heard Evelyn's voice. Not literally. Just a memory. Michael, don't spend your life waiting for someone else's permission. My eyes opened. Something inside me shifted. Not anger. Resolve. That night, I walked into the kitchen, pulled out the yellow legal pad Evelyn used for grocery lists, and wrote one sentence across the top. Start living again. Below it, I wrote another. Sell the house. I stared at the words for nearly a minute. Then I smiled. For the first time in years, the future excited me. At exactly 8:30 the next morning, I called my real estate attorney. Good morning, Michael. I want to sell my house. He didn't hesitate. When? As fast as legally possible. A pause. Are you serious? I've never been more serious. Within minutes he was explaining market values. Your neighborhood is hot right now. Clean title. Strong demand. You could easily get around $900,000. $900,000. I almost laughed. Evelyn and I had bought that home decades earlier for less than $200,000. Neither of us had ever imagined it would become our greatest investment. What if I need it sold in 2 weeks? I asked. Silence. It'll be difficult. But if we find the right cash buyer, it's possible. Find one. I'll start today. The next call went to my financial advisor. He had managed our investments for over a decade. When I told him my plan, he stopped speaking. Finally, he asked, "What exactly are you buying?" "A new beginning." He chuckled. "No, seriously, I'm buying a luxury condominium." Another long silence. Then, Michael, "I know, you've surprised me. I'm surprising myself." He pulled up my accounts. House equity, investments, pension, savings, Evelyn's untouched life insurance. Every number appeared on his screen. Finally, he exhaled. "You can actually do this. No mortgage? No loans? No, you'll own it outright." I leaned back in my chair. For years I had been living like a man who had nothing left. The truth was, I had simply forgotten what was possible. Over the next several days, my life became wonderfully chaotic. Realtors walked through the house. Photographers took pictures. Paperwork piled across the dining room table. Offers arrived faster than I expected. Cash buyers competed. Within 5 days, the house was under contract. Closing scheduled. Everything moving faster than I could have imagined. Meanwhile, Emily called. "Dad, don't forget to water my flowers while we're gone." "I won't." "Oh, and could you check on the house every couple of days?" "Of course." She kept talking. Sprinklers, packages, mail, garbage pickup. She sounded less like a daughter, and more like a property manager assigning weekend duties. I listened quietly. Every instruction made my decision feel even more right. She never once asked, "Dad, what are your plans while we're away?" Because in her mind, I didn't have any. 3 days before their flight, I met my neighbor Margaret for iced tea. She watched me smile the entire afternoon. Finally, she narrowed her eyes. "You're up to something." I laughed. "Am I that obvious?" "Michael, I taught 8th graders for 30 years. I can smell secrets." So, I told her everything. The sale, the condo, the timing, the surprise waiting after Hawaii. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, folded her arms, and grinned. "Oh, this is going to be magnificent." I laughed harder than I had in years. Then she pointed one finger at me. "Promise me one thing." "What?" "When your daughter realizes what she's done, don't waste the lesson by yelling." I nodded slowly. "I won't. Because the greatest revenge isn't making someone feel your anger. It's making them face the consequences of underestimating you." And Emily had no idea. Her lesson had already begun. The morning of their flight arrived with the quiet confidence of a day that was about to change everything. At 6:30, my phone rang. "Emily." "Morning, Dad." She sounded excited, light, carefree. I could almost hear the airport announcements echoing behind her. "You all made it? We're checking our bags now." "I'm glad." There was a brief pause before she slipped back into what had become her favorite role, managing my life. "Just remember to bring in the mail every day." "I will." "And the sprinklers come on Tuesday and Friday." "I know." "Oh, and if anything seems wrong at the house, call Richard immediately." I smiled to myself. "I'll take good care of it. I knew I could count on you." She hung up. She believed she had left me behind to protect the past. She had no idea I was about to build a future. Exactly 1 hour later, their plane lifted into the Nevada sky. I watched it disappear from the observation deck at the airport. Not with sadness, with gratitude. As the aircraft became a tiny silver dot against the morning sun, I whispered, "Have a wonderful vacation." Then I turned around and drove straight to my attorney's office. The paperwork was already waiting. Stacks of contracts, disclosure forms, transfer documents. Each signature felt strangely liberating. My attorney smiled as I signed the final page. "Congratulations, Michael. The buyer wired the funds this morning. It's official." I looked down at the papers. 26 years. Reduced to a few signatures. Oddly enough, I didn't feel loss. I felt lighter. Because memories don't live inside walls. They live inside people. And Evelyn would never be trapped inside an empty house. She was coming with me, wherever I went. The movers arrived the following morning. I had spent the previous week packing in complete secrecy. Every evening after sunset, one room at a time. Carefully wrapping photographs. Labeling every box. Keeping only what truly mattered. Evelyn's books. Our wedding album. The coffee mug she loved. The old cardigan she'd hung behind the kitchen door. Our framed picture from the Grand Canyon. Everything else. Furniture. Unused dishes. Old decorations. Years of forgotten clutter was donated. I wasn't just moving, I was letting go. By noon, the house stood empty. The echoes inside every room sounded unfamiliar. It was no longer the place where my family had grown. It was simply a building waiting for another beginning. I walked from room to room one last time, not crying, not lingering, just thankful. Then I locked the front door for the final time, placed the keys into the buyer's hand, and walked away without looking back. Some goodbyes don't need witnesses. At 3:30 that afternoon, I stepped into my new home. The elevator doors opened directly into my private foyer. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the living room. The Las Vegas skyline glittered beneath the afternoon sun. Beyond it, the spring mountains glowed gold. The entire city looked different from above. Smaller, quieter, like all the worries I'd carried for years had finally been left behind on the ground. The sales representative handed me 2 polished silver keys. Welcome home. Home, the word felt different now, not because of luxury, because of possibility. I walked onto the terrace. A warm breeze brushed against my face. For the first time since Evelyn died, I wasn't surviving. I was living. 4 days later, my phone buzzed. Emily. I watched it ring until voicemail answered. A minute later, another call. Then another. She finally left a message. Dad, Mercer's sister drove past your house. She said there were moving boxes outside. I think she must have seen the wrong place. Call me. I smiled. No, she had seen the right place. I simply wasn't ready for the conversation yet. Day 5. Another voicemail. Dad, please call me. Delete. Day 6. 3 missed calls. Day 7. 5 more. I answered none of them, not out of revenge. Because confusion is a powerful teacher. Sometimes people need to sit alone with the consequences of their assumptions. On day 8, Daniel called. Dad. His voice sounded cautious. Margaret told me something. Did she? She said a moving truck came. Yes, and there's a real estate sign in the yard. There was. Silence, finally. What did you do? I leaned back in a chair on my new terrace. The evening sun painted the mountains copper and gold. I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. I upgraded. Another long silence. Then, a laugh. Soft, disbelieving. Oh my God, you actually did it. I did. Emily has no idea. I know. Should I tell her? No. Why? Because some lessons deserve a proper ending. Daniel laughed again. I can't believe this. You'll understand soon enough. I ended the call. Below me, thousands of city lights flickered to life, one after another, just like hope. And somewhere over the Pacific, my daughter was still enjoying paradise, completely unaware that the home she'd expected to return to no longer belonged to our family. The family returned from Hawaii on a warm Sunday afternoon. While they were collecting their luggage at the airport, I was sitting on my 23rd floor terrace, enjoying a fresh cup of espresso and watching the Las Vegas skyline shimmer beneath the setting sun. My phone buzzed. Emily. I looked at the screen, smiled, and let it ring. A minute later, she called again. Then again. Then again. By the 5th call, I knew she had already driven past the neighborhood. She had seen strangers' cars in the driveway, different curtains in the windows, a completely unfamiliar family unloading groceries into what she still believed was her childhood home. Reality had finally caught up with her. By the 10th missed call, Daniel's name appeared on my screen. I answered on the 3rd attempt. Dad. His voice carried equal parts disbelief and amusement. Emily is losing her mind. I chuckled softly. I imagine she is. Where are you? I'm home. He sighed. No, I mean, where is home now? I looked around my living room. The sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden reflections across the hardwood floors. Evelyn's framed photograph sat beside 3 blooming desert roses on the terrace. Home. This was home. The 23rd floor, I replied calmly. The view is spectacular. Daniel laughed. You actually bought the condo. I told you I upgraded. He shook his head, even though I couldn't see him. Dad, she's standing in front of the old house right now. I know. She's crying. I closed my eyes for a moment. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel guilt. I felt something much quieter. Necessity. Some lessons only become real when they hurt. Tell her to call me when she's ready to talk. She wants to talk now. No, why? Because right now she's reacting. I want to speak to the woman who's willing to understand. Daniel was silent. Finally he whispered, I'm sorry, Dad. For what? I should have fought harder. I smiled. You tried. I should have done more. You weren't the one who decided I was finished living. Another long pause. I love you, Dad, I know. So do I. By evening, the missed calls reached 31. Finally, I answered. The line stayed silent. Then, Dad? Emily's voice trembled, not with anger, with shock. Hello, Emily, where are you? I'm sitting on my terrace. What terrace? My terrace. Silence, I sold the house. She inhaled sharply. You what? I sold it. When? While you were enjoying Hawaii. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious. She struggled to breathe. Those people, they own it now. You sold our home? I corrected her gently. No, I sold my home. The words hit like thunder. Silence then, without telling us? It belonged to me. But you never asked what I wanted. You decided for me. Dad, that's not fair. I leaned forward. No? You decided I was too old to travel. You decided I should stay behind. You decided my job was protecting an empty house. I simply found a better use for it. She began crying. Real crying. Not dramatic. Not manipulative. The kind that escapes before pride can stop it. I was trying to protect you. I know. I thought the trip would be hard on you. I'm 62, not 92. I run 3 miles 4 days a week. I manage my own finances. I cook. I drive. I've traveled before. So tell me, when exactly did I become someone who needed permission to live? She couldn't answer. I continued quietly. After your mother died, I stopped moving forward. I stayed in that house because it felt safe, but safety slowly became a prison. And then, you handed me the key. What do you mean? When you told me to stay home and watch the house, you accidentally reminded me that I still had choices. I realized I wasn't protecting memories anymore. I was hiding inside them. Another silence. This one lasted much longer. Then she whispered, I'm so sorry. I looked toward Evelyn's photograph. I believe you, but apologies don't erase moments. They only begin healing them. Emily took a shaky breath. Can I see your new place? You can. When? When you're ready to see me, instead of the version of me you've imagined. I understand. No, you understand a little. The rest, you'll have to learn. She didn't argue. For the first time in years, she simply listened. When the call ended, I looked at my phone. 43 missed calls. 43 chances to panic. 43 moments of regret. 43 reminders that people rarely appreciate someone's independence until they realize it's gone. I set the phone on the table beside my coffee. Above me, the evening sky deepened into shades of orange and violet. Below me, Las Vegas came alive. And for the first time since Evelyn passed away, I finally felt alive too. For 3 weeks, the silence between Emily and me remained. Not the cold silence of strangers. The uncomfortable silence of two people forced to confront a truth neither of them could ignore. She didn't call. Neither did I. Some wounds need space before they can begin to heal, and some lessons lose their power if you rush to soften them. One quiet Saturday morning, the concierge called my apartment. Mr. Carter? Yes? Your daughter is here. I looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The desert sun stretched across the mountains. I smiled. Please send her up. A minute later, the private elevator doors opened. Emily stepped out slowly. She wasn't dressed the way she usually was. No designer handbag, no expensive sunglasses, no perfectly rehearsed smile. She looked tired, almost nervous. For the first time in years, she wasn't the woman with all the answers. She was simply my daughter. She stood in the foyer without saying a word. Her eyes wandered across the apartment, the open living room, the polished hardwood floors, the shelves filled with Evelyn's favorite books, the modern kitchen, the espresso machine humming quietly in the corner. Then she walked toward the terrace. The city stretched endlessly beneath us. The spring mountains glowed in the afternoon light. She whispered almost to herself, It's beautiful. It is. She turned toward me. I never imagined this. I know. I thought. She stopped. You thought I'd spend the rest of my life in that old house. Tears filled her eyes. I did. I nodded. I know. We sat across from each other with fresh coffee between us. Neither of us touched it. Emily looked down at her hands. I owe you an apology. I didn't interrupt. I've been treating you like, she struggled to find the words, like you were already old. I waited. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I know. I was scared. Her voice cracked. When Mom died, I kept imagining I'd lose you too. So every decision I made, I thought I was protecting you. I leaned back quietly. I believe you. She looked relieved. Then I continued. But protecting someone isn't the same as controlling them. Her expression fell. You made decisions about my life without asking what I wanted. You planned my future. You reduced my world to one house. And the worst part, you thought it was kindness. A tear rolled down her cheek. I did. I know. I stood and walked toward Evelyn's photograph. The frame caught the afternoon sunlight. I loved your mother more than words could ever explain. Emily nodded. I know. When she died, I thought my life had ended too. So I stayed inside that house. Not because I loved living there, but because I was afraid to leave her behind. Emily wiped another tear away. I never realized that. Neither did I. I smiled softly, until you told me I was too old to fly. She lowered her head. I'll regret saying that for the rest of my life. You should. She looked up, startled. I don't say that to punish you. I say it because some mistakes deserve to be remembered. If you forget the pain, you repeat it. She slowly nodded. I understand. This time I think you actually do. Just then, the elevator chimed again. Daniel stepped out carrying a paper bag filled with tacos. He looked from me to Emily, then grinned. So, am I interrupting a peace treaty? Emily laughed through her tears. For once. I hope not. Daniel placed the food on the kitchen island. I figured neither of you remembered to eat. I smiled. Your timing is still terrible. And perfect. Within minutes, the apartment filled with laughter. Real laughter. The kind our family hadn't shared since Evelyn passed away. Emily looked around the room. This place feels alive. It is. So are you. I met her eyes. That's the point. As the evening sun dipped below the mountains, Emily stepped onto the terrace beside me. I almost lost you, she whispered. No, I answered gently. You almost lost sight of me. She reached over and hugged me tightly. I'm proud of you, Dad. Those 5 words meant more than any apology, more than any explanation, more than 43 missed calls. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't seeing an old man. She was seeing her father again. And that was the revenge I'd been waiting for. 3 months passed. Life settled into a new rhythm. Not the quiet, predictable routine I'd been trapped in after Evelyn died, but something entirely different, something alive. Every morning began with a run along the walking trails near my building. Every evening ended on my terrace, watching the Las Vegas skyline transform into a sea of lights. For the first time in years, I wasn't counting the days. I was making them count. Emily kept her promise. She came to visit every few weeks, not because she felt obligated, because she wanted to. The scheduled phone calls disappeared. So did the polite conversations. Now we talked about real things. Her fears, my dreams, the mistakes we'd both made. One evening she looked at me over dinner and smiled. You know, I almost missed who you really were. I smiled back. No, you almost forgot. She nodded. I did. I was so afraid of losing you that I stopped letting you live. There was no anger left between us, only honesty. Sometimes, that's harder than forgiveness. Daniel still showed up without calling, usually carrying tacos, sometimes pizza, always laughing. You know, Dad, he grinned one night. I've started warning people not to underestimate you. I laughed. Smart man. They ask why. What do you tell them? I tell them my father sold his entire life while everyone else was on vacation. We both burst into laughter. Even Emily couldn't help smiling. A month later, I boarded another flight to Maui. This time, alone, not because I had no one to travel with. Because I wanted to prove something. Not to my family. Not to strangers. To myself. As the airplane climbed above the clouds, I looked out the window. The Nevada desert slowly disappeared beneath a blanket of white. Hours later, the endless blue Pacific stretched across the horizon. Beautiful, limitless, exactly how life should feel. On my 4th morning in Hawaii, I booked a snorkeling tour. The young instructor glanced at me. You sure you're okay with this? I smiled. I've been waiting years for this. She laughed. All right then. The ocean welcomed me like an old friend. Sunlight danced beneath the water. Colorful fish drifted through the coral. Then, a massive green sea turtle appeared. Slow, graceful, completely unbothered by the world around it. I floated beside it for several minutes, watching it move without hurry, without apology, without asking permission. In that moment, I realized something. Growing older isn't the same as growing smaller. Age isn't measured by birthdays. It's measured by how much life you're still willing to chase. When I returned home, I found a handwritten letter waiting on my kitchen counter. It was from Emily. It read, "Dad, for years I believed protecting you meant making your world smaller. You taught me that real love gives people room to keep growing. Thank you for reminding me that you're still the strongest man I know. I'm proud to be your daughter. Love, Emily." I read it twice, then carefully folded it, and placed it beside Evelyn's photograph. I had a feeling she would have smiled. 8 months after moving into my new home, the desert roses bloomed again. All 3 of them. I stood on the terrace with my morning coffee, the same coffee I'd once drank alone in silence. Only now, the silence felt peaceful, not lonely. My phone buzzed. A message from Emily. "Dinner tonight?" Another from Daniel. "I'll bring tacos." I laughed. Life wasn't perfect. Families never are. But we were finally honest with each other, and honesty has a way of healing what pride almost destroys. Looking back, people often ask whether selling the house was my revenge. It wasn't. The house was only a symbol. The real revenge was refusing to become the helpless old man everyone expected me to be. The real revenge was choosing life over comfort, hope over grief, adventure over routine. I didn't win because my daughter cried. I won because she finally saw me again, not as someone to manage, not as someone to protect, but as the father who had spent a lifetime teaching his children how to stand on their own, and finally remembered to do the same for himself. So if you're listening to this today, and someone has made you feel too old, too broken, too forgotten, remember this. The greatest comeback doesn't begin with proving them wrong. It begins with believing you still have another chapter to write. Because as long as you're breathing, your story isn't over. It's just waiting for you to turn the page. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable revenge story. And now tell me in the comments, what would you have done if your own family told you that you were too old to join them? I'd love to read your thoughts. Until next time, stay strong, stay fearless, and remember, the sweetest revenge is living a life no one expected you to have. The end.